am going to begin with a story. The year is 2013. Our most recent Final Fantasy game being 13-2, with those who did enjoy it awaiting the upcoming lightning returns. It's time for the E3 stream, at which point I am sitting in a Skype call in my Hope cosplay with other Hope cosplayers, hoping to channel this silly little luck that we get a Lightning Returns trailer with Hope in it. Instead, we are greeted with a message from Nomura himself, as we are unexpectedly given a Versus 13 / Final Fantasy 15 reveal trailer, and the crowd goes wild. After 3 years of no trailers, rumored cancellation, it was actually happening. It was coming out sometime soon, and even though it was being rebranded into 15, it looked fantastic. The reason I have chosen to start here instead of here or here is because this is the trailer that grabbed my attention. The trailer that you can still see today and look at the comments of, this is the game we wanted and did not get. Fast forward 3 years, we have trailers, we have demos, we have time updates, events, and the release date finally comes. Final Fantasy 15 releases after a 2-month delay in November of 2016. And was it worth the wait? Well, that's what soon followed. What followed was a reaction across the internet, across the Final Fantasy community, that 15 was a good game, a beautiful, fantastic game, but boy, was it flawed. And even after years of updates and DLC, we react to Final Fantasy 15 something along the lines of this.
Oh, that would have been so
So, as we are now in our 9th anniversary of Final Fantasy 15, soon to be 10, and soon to be 20 since Versus 13 was announced, why the fuck am I here? Why are you here? Probably because you haven't heard me shut up about this project for several months, if you know me personally. Otherwise, those viewing this are just a fellow Versus 13 truther, eating up whatever content we can fucking get before the release of Kingdom Hearts 4, if you care. With that being said, today's discussion is going to be on what remains of Versus 13. In which case, I have done my absolute best to go so deep into the rabbit hole of all of this, to not only cover what went wrong in development cycle, but what did remain from Versus into the final product of 15, but also to take a look at the games that have since come out that were in fact inspired by Versus 13. So, with that being said, it's time to get into it. Before getting into the development hell cycle, I want to talk about the current reception. Because while Final Fantasy 15 did successfully well, both in units sold, community support, and, a very good large number of positive reviews, there are those, such as myself, that look back on the earlier trailers to the final product we got and have a reaction that's something like this.
Oh, why did Square have to choose 13 too when Lightning returns over versus 13?
But it's also a case of laughing at our own pain, roasting ourselves, and lying awake in wondering, what if? What could have been? So what went wrong? While I want to point out that there have been others that have covered such topics, such as Final Weapon, I imagine there are many of you that do not have 3 hours of time to dedicate yourself to such things. So, I am going to go in rapid fire through the development hell before I get into the actual lore analysis, and I'm going to do so as quickly as possible. That being said, I will be showing as many receipts that I have been able to find. We start off about 2004. The concept of the FNC project was again, and Nomura was handed the reins of Versus 13, at which point this was nothing more than little sketches and concept arts that were not going to be revealed to the world until 2006. At this time, it is important to note that the White engine was in development for about a year up until this point. This would be renamed Crystal Tools, but it is important to note the name change, but also what went wrong here, as problems started from day one. E3 2006, the project was revealed, and while the crowd was hyped, very little was known. We got 13, we got a little Versus 13 trailer, some lore information, but that was it. It's just a reveal project. In fall of 2006, it's also important to note that many game devs made public note that the PS3 hardware was the difficult task to overcome, as this new HD hardware was things that they had. Can I help you? Uh-huh. Yeah, okay. Come here. Hardware and software to development was in fact more difficult than the transition between the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2, which I do find very odd, but given that I am not a developer or a programmer, I know nothing. In 2007, Nomura also gave an interview that saying that he wanted Versus 13 to be his last Final Fantasy project. No wonder why he's so salty. No wonder. Going back on track though, it is important to note that the 1.0 version of Crystal Tools is complete in 2007. However, in that Nomura has to wait until Final Fantasy XIII is ready to launch, given that the number title is the priority over Versus, at which point he picks up his things and turns towards Kingdom Hearts to keep his development team. Now, if we fast forward to June of 2008, there is in fact an announcement that Versus 13 has been officially on hold until 13 is done and given priority. At which point, the next day, Square goes out of his way to very firmly deny it, but I believe the facts speak for themselves at this point. The next time we see Versus is at Jump Festa, December 2008, in which we are given a trailer and then a bit of nothing. Also this time, around 2009, that behind the scenes, that apparently they were already considering turning Versus into 15. Can you sit down, please? Thank you. However, Nomura pushed back, wanting to hold on to his creative vision, good for him, citing that the game should focus more on artistic vision than profits and things that they thought that the game would make themselves better, rather than the quality of the game itself. A then private closed doors trailer is shown at TGS 2009, in which we can see footage of this behind those closed doors, but really, it's nothing special. On December 2009, Final Fantasy XIII does in fact release in Japan. All the while, Nomura has dropped a few Kingdom Hearts games in the meantime. With 13 finally out of the way in March 2010, Nomura and his team unfortunately then look at Crystal Tools and basically decide it's unusable. This is not a surprise for those who know how difficult Crystal Tools is, but also the fact that the Versus 13 had basically been forced to create the game on almost no resources up until this point. Also, at this time, behind the scenes, the Luminous engine is in development in spring of 2010. In an interview during June 2010, Nomura does declare that the Versus 13 writing is done, as well as character designs and other preliminary work. Progress is going slow, but it is finally going. Fortunately, this is where things once again get rocky, as Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 launches with Crystal Tools, and it's beyond broken. At which point, resources are then shuffled back over to fix it. All the while, Versus 13 full production was finally getting underway. Our final long Versus 13 trailer was revealed at the very beginning of 2011. This is unfortunately when tragedy strikes. As we all know, Japan was in fact hit with an earthquake that was then followed by a tsunami, with the devastating casualties and destruction caused by unfortunate natural disasters. It's also at this time that there are some corporate reshuffling and even possible backstabbing, as things get once again shuffled around in the mess. Also at this time, Square gets word that the PS4 is in development. Yippee! So all of that work that they've been doing for Versus 13 up until this point is basically for nothing. Type 0 releases in Japan the following year, and once again, Nomura voices in December 2011 that Versus 13 still isn't in full production because the Crystal Tools engine is that fucking broken. This is the point then we get awkward silence from the public, when rumors are of cancellation, as Nomura has been silent. Meanwhile, 13.2 has come out, as well as several other Kingdom Hearts games. The world asks, where is Versus? Meanwhile, behind the actual scenes, not only has development shifted over to a new engine called Ebony, since Luminous isn't done yet, but Tabata is brought on board. Unfortunately, this does seem to be that it was against his will, much like Nomura's future departure, as Tabata wanted to work on his Type 0 sequel, which of course never happened. Which then brings us back to that lovely, lovely E3 2013 trailer, at which Versus is officially turned into 15. Though at this time, several sources promised that much of the lore will remain the same. Yeah, no. Tabata took over as full director at the end of 2013, at which point no such news is unveiled to the public until sometime later. With the PS4 launching, the only real news that we get until after the director changed, that the shift to 15 on the Luminous engine with Tabata at the helm is only finished at the very beginning of 2014. At which point breaks the scene that this game was in fact very rushed, with such tight deadlines, limited budget, and even limited staff, as poor Tabata really shot himself in the foot on 2 different occasions. The first note being that he limited himself to a small team of 200 or so people to focus on individual talents, but also he engaged with the community during the active time ports, reading and consuming every single piece of feedback, trying to please everyone at the same time. Also have evidence to show that Nomura, in fact, did not plan for 15 to be an open world game, but rather than the The classic have towns and then some world exploration between loading screens, etc. Of course, though, Tabata, and with his all the pressure on him and wanting to appeal to current game audiences, wanted a more open world aspect, which hadn't really been done at this point, at least not in Final Fantasy. We see similarities between LR and 12, all while then doubling back to having to change things at the last minute because the game was so rushed. The official change did not come to us until fall 2014, which then was followed by a 15 demo a few months later. All the while, poor Nomura had taken his baby away from him, is hardly seen in public, but when he is, it's noticeably that he is depressed. And he also opened up that he adopted a couple of kittens for emotional support because he had his precious baby taken away from. All while 15 is in full speed ahead, we then got the Final Fantasy VII Remake announcement, at which point Nomura didn't even realize this was his project being dumped on him until the trailer was released. Remember when I said he was salty and had every reason to be? Yeah. With news breaking that 15 was going to be as part of a universe project with the platinum demos coming out, at the uncovered reveal, Brotherhood, Kingsglaive, and all sorts, we had to wonder. 15 did look, in fact, different. It was the same, but all at the same time, not. The invasion of Somnia, that the game wanted to open, was shoved over to Kingsglaive. All while, hardly resembled the verses in early trailers that many were attracted to. It looked beautiful and fine, but nothing like we really expected. Then came the news on August 15th that after all this time, 15 was in fact going to be delayed for 2 months in order to try to avoid a day one patch. Going behind the scenes, I can find that this is in fact legit. But the real reason this delay happened was not only the crunch for time, but also because of the worldwide release. Given that they had to have multiple languages voice acted, and by then, but also wanted as few bugs as possible on launch. As we know, we still had a day one patch on launch day, despite having the announcement that 15 goes gold on October 27th. Though it could also be noted that that one-day patch could have been because of the straight date release as well. Of course, 15 does not stop on release day, as we had updates, multiple DLC, more behind-the-scenes unfortunate expectations with Tabata leaving, and then the cancellation of the second season of DLC, which then got wrapped up into a novel, things that are all widely known. Things that are often discussed about, but that's not why we're here. While often Nomura is the scapegoat for the Versus 13 hell, I do want to focus on the facts, as we've already covered what a mess the Crystal 2 engine was that shoved development back and caused one roadblock after another, not only with 13 but 14 as well. It's also important to note that how many games Nomura was in fact focused on during this wait period. And while the development of Versus 13 was still ongoing on top of that, they were in fact working with limited resources. Every setback possible wasn't really their fault. So much so that when Tabata came on board, he did in fact did his best. But with the pressure, the time constraints, and as well as just the harsh Japanese work environment, pushing themselves to this absolute limit, I really don't think that it was going to end well. And 15 is in fact a beautiful game. Still today, it still holds up. It's just lacking It's unfortunate to look back on this and think what could have been if it wasn't for so much corporate overreach. If they had actually gone and used, perhaps, I don't know, Unreal Engine instead of Crystal Tools, maybe that would have fast-tracked the development, but I don't know. It's unfortunate. That's to say. Today, there are people not only still finding cut content in the game's code and posting it for all of us to see, but also the community wanting more, as 15 just did not feel finished even after all of those extensions and updates, as it felt more like filling potholes in the pothole-filled road, when in reality, you kind of just have to rip up the road and start all over. I'd especially like to point out that there is in fact a YouTuber making an Insomnia-based mod in the Kingdom Hearts 3 engine. I'd like to point out the statement that no one seems to be more upset with Final Fantasy XV than the Kingdom Hearts fans. While the stark contrast between Versus and 15 is typically the mood and the lighting and how Versus had a darker atmosphere versus the road trip feel of the 15, I did in fact discover that from the beginning Nomura did want a road trip vibe, which I did feel odd, but considering we only got glimpses of the overworld in those older trailers, it's not entirely surprising. An odd fact that I did find in this rabbit hole of research is that Nomura did not consider turning it into a series until later into development, some past 2010, more closer to 2012. So late in the development cycle, it seemed like a harsh issue given that he already had so much on his plate. Not to mention the delays that really weren't his fault given the game engine issues that shuffled back and forth, that I do feel like Nomura did bite off a little bit of more that he could chew. Concerning the comment of that the internet wanted to point out that, oh, he wanted to make it a musical, yeah, that was a joke. You gotta get over it. Yes, he said it in an interview, and I have it right here, but I do believe it is taken out of context, if not even slightly mistranslated. I do believe his comments as such were truly meant to be taken as a ha-ha funny emote and not actually seriously. Please shut the fuck up about this goddamn comment, okay? I will bite your ankles. The main theme of lore that got cut from Versus was the themes of death as well as the thrown out lore that they had to redo at the last minute. As we can see that the Versus 13 lore was not only supposed to wrap around Etro and death worship, but also things like the eyes that see the light of expiring souls, the crystals that were reduced to only one. While it has not been specifically said that such censorship occurred specifically because of China, all sources at least point to assuming it was because of China. I cannot confirm, as there has been no confirmation of that. Themes of death were only condensed to an aesthetic, cast wearing so much black, and the skulls seen on their outfits, accessories, but that's about it. We do in fact see one painting of Etro remain in Kingsglaive, as the scene of Luna and Nyx meeting, mirroring the scene of Stella and Noctis, but that's it. There is very much we do not know about Versus original story content and lore, about what got changed from the PS3 to the PS4 era before Nomura was forced to step down, but what also we didn't see off screen. Especially given that the main writing was in fact done by 2010. It's unfortunate to think that Tabata did sit on much of the script, but that so many concepts had to be gutted or watered down as he took the project in a different direction. While there are supposed leaks from former employees saying what the story was going to be, I will not be discussing these because there's no actual concrete proof. There are no signs of any of the demon lore in verses that I could find, but I do have to wonder if that was just sort of a reworked concept of death. Or so much to think that maybe the people turning from humans to demons can possibly be drawn back to the Lassie turning into Sith. But I suppose that's a bit much of a stretch. While there was in fact a rumor that Stella was in fact supposed to die in Versus 13 fairly early on, possibly by Noctis's hand, and that's why Ravis wanted revenge, there's no confirmation if that's the reason why Luna still died. I will say, an interesting concept that I found in this pile of French information that I had to go through is that Cor was in fact supposed to be the 5th party member, but was cut, not because of the time constraints on development, but because Tabata and the brothers decided that Cor was too old to be hanging out with the rest of the guys, despite that's, the entire mentor trope to begin with. We of course do see Leviathan take place in the Versus 13 lore, but once again, the summons were probably not seen as gods, the astrals that the lore was given, and instead it was going to be Etra. We know that the Empire's goal did not change. They wanted the crystals at all cost. All 4. 3 of which have got into the lore, and it instead was just given to Insomnia, being the line of Lucius had the one and only remaining crystal, but it's likely to say that the Versus plot would have focused on surviving the invasion of Insomnia, getting out of Insomnia, and then a more serious, less lighthearted road trip on the way to the Empire to seize back the stolen crystals, at which point Noctis still would have unlocked his powers and potential along the way, which is likely where the summon plotline comes back into play. At least that's my assumption and thought, given that there's only so many puzzle pieces one can pull. The main Versus 13 bit that we wanted and were only able to get in bits and pieces was Insomnia, as many of the early trailers all saw the invasion of Insomnia being at the forefront of the beginning of the game. How much of an impact it was supposed to be for Noctis and his friends to escape the city and take on the Empire. This entire plot line was cut due to time and shoved off into Kingsglaive instead, which is fine, I guess. Not really. The final result of Insomnia being the final engine on launch was in fact fairly disappointing. And while this was in fact fixed in both the Royal Edition, giving new areas and new side content and even bosses before you fight Arden, as well as Arden's almost entire DLC being Insomnia, destroying it yourself, it's still just not the same. And that's going to be a point when I look at the other games on this list today, because we can clearly see what is going on here. Even Dissidia made a joke about it. I will say a lore continuity error that I find confusing, if not just complicated, is the shift between the war between Lucius and the Empire. As in Versus, we know that the signing ceremony was supposed to take place, and in Kingsglaive they say that the war is happening for hundreds of years, and the official wiki timeline shows this. But it's odd that in certain early 15 trailers, dialogue suggests that the war actually hadn't been officially declared yet. Perhaps this is just me reading things out of context, or perhaps not just following certain translations, but it is an odd change in script. As in Versus, we almost don't see anyone from the Empire in those trailers before 2013. We have the, hooded Rafus, but that's it. We don't know where his loyalties lie with Versus 13 and Tenebrae, between him and Stella fighting Noctis for one reason or another. And even in 2013, other than the soldiers, we're only shown bits and pieces of Arden the Emperor and the Old Man. The one receipt that I unfortunately cannot find, and still keeps me awake at night, is about the Dream Realm. At which point I say, I swear, I am not making it up. But it also says something that even the Reddit people of the Versus 13 side said, yeah, I have no idea what you're even talking about. In Versus, we can see bits and pieces of Stella and Noctis interacting, and this does in fact carry over to the early 15 trailers where Noctis is constantly falling asleep. At which point, the concept of the Dream Realm was born, and still does exist in remnants of the game, as we see it in the Platinum demo, but also Luna's death scene. However, the receipt that I swear was spoken about several years ago in an interview that I cannot find to save my life is that there was supposed to be a concept of Noctis speaking to Stella or Luna in this dream realm several points through the game. This was going to be their point of conversation that I suppose was just turned into the journal, maybe? But this was supposed to be the explanation for Noctis sleeping so much, as well as the dreams that he had. We could see bits and glimpses of pieces of it, at which point, during my full playthrough during release day, I got perked up. But it was once again just sort of there and then just not really brought up ever again. There is also a line discussed between Stella and Noctis in the 2013 trailer where Noctis says, "There are things I just know and I have no idea how." Well, the 13 in me points back to Yule and her Eyes of Etro ability. It's likely tied to the cut eyes that see the light of expiring souls. To which I do believe that this could be a fractured remnant of the nightmares and headaches that Noctis has before fighting Titan. But once again, it's weird how it seems to pop up in this 15 story once and then never again. Once again, showing the signs of how much cut content was gone through at the game at the last minute. We also only see a bit where Noctis almost changed his fate from a cutscene where he tried to go against Bahamut's will, but then just caved. A cutscene that almost got so far into development that it even got English voiced. But no, we were robbed. While the themes in the 13 trilogy often revolved around fighting fate and rebelling against the gods, Versus and 15 flipped the script for better or worse. As is one of the popular Versus taglines is a meeting predestined by the divine, as we can see between Noctis and Stella, and their shared brush with death, we do see that carry over between Noctis and Luna, as Noctis finds out that he is the grand chosen king, and they both have fates decided for themselves by the gods, or then the Astrals versus Etro or Eos or whatever was supposed to be in Versus. This concept probably changed between the two, but I do find it odd that even at the end of 15, they don't ever really rebel against their fate. And suppose that is what is supposed to happen to the tragic ending, as Nomura promised a tragic story with Shakespearean quotes, lots of character deaths, and then some, which we do still have. But when looking at the cancelled DLC Dawn of the Future novel, it can't help but to feel that it would have been better if such an ending had existed in the game to begin with. But on the other hand, reading it also felt like they were just hitting the backspace button and awkwardly writing AU fanfiction to make people happy. And not in the good quality fanfiction way. I'm talking like it's awkward as fuck. I put off reading this book for 5 years because I was so mad at feelings and gross, to the point where I finally got over it and was actually like, ow, my expectations were set way too damn high. Whoops. At the time of this recording, there is no Kingdom Hearts 4 update. However, we all see it. We've all been seeing it since 3. We know where this is going. It is very, very obvious. And while I can, in fact, sit here and share my own little theories here and there about Yuzora and his friends, given that they are just that, just fan theories, the lore extensive comparison will wait until after 4 is actually come out, and I have buried myself in every single bit of quadrant lore they give us. And now we move on to Renatis. Now, before I actually get into talking about Renatis, I do have to go over a couple disclaimers. The first one, and the more important one, being that if you are interested in buying this game and playing this game, do not get the Switch version. I don't know what it is about the Switch version, but it does crash on a somewhat regular basis. To the point in my roughly 30-hour playthrough, I counted about 8 times. All happening utterly randomly, sometimes mid-cutscene, sometimes just transferring from one loading area to another, and sometimes right after a boss. Hooray! I have never encountered this issue with any other Switch game. Now, that being said, thankfully, the autosave recovered very easily, to the point where on all of these crash incidents, I only ever needed to redo one single boss fight. That being said, it's still annoying to deal with. Don't buy the Switch version. The other important note that I have to give is the rating here. Given that this game is T, it's not that bad. But I would essentially like to highlight the drug use and reference warning, as it is important to the plot, unfortunately. Now granted, I do believe that the themes in this game were handled somewhat well, but if that is a subject that you do wish to avoid, simply because, then this game is not for you, and I suggest skipping ahead to this entire section. Renatis is made and developed by a wonderful fellow named Takumi Isobe, who grew up loving games such as Kingdom Hearts, but also got very excited at that first Versus 13 trailer those many years ago. Years later, as he grew up, got into game development himself, well, this is what we got. To the point where, in an interview, when he meeting Nomura and discussing their little collab side quest, he did jokingly ask if he could play Versus 13. If you look at the reviews of this game, it's very, very harsh. Almost no one has anything positive to say about this game, which is sad. And unfortunately, it took every single last bit of my gamer patience to finish this game, which tells you something. That being said, I will not be dragging it through the mud. I'm going to be honest, but not necessarily harsh. Given that this is not a review and an analysis video, I'm not going to get too into it, but I also do not know how many spoilers I will be giving at this time. So I'm just going to give a generic spoiler-ass warning. You have been warned. Renatis takes place in present-day Shibuya, hence the reason for the World's End with You collab that was in the side quest. The studio is a low-budget game studio, so it is not completely breathtaking graphics and jaw-dropping gameplay or anything of the sort, but it's still nice. In this fictional society, magic is real and has been part of society for about 100 years. When the game starts, we are given dates for each chapter, and the entire game's plot does take place in about 2 weeks' time. Our two main characters are Marin? I'm not entirely sure. I'm gonna call him Marin. Please don't come after me if I got it wrong. And sorry. Our discount Noctis of a protag is very much on brand. You can tell by his appearance, his fashion, it's essentially, he looks more like Yzora than Noctis, of course, but the inspiration is very cutthroat. Though unlike our previous protags, he is a bit of a grumpy loner. With his main goal, we see that he wants to become the strongest wizard. Unfortunately, we are not given much in-depth in why he wants to achieve his goal, which can be seen through this game a lot. The character development is there, it's just subtle. It's not bad, it's not rushed, it's just not in depth. And that is one of the flaws. Meanwhile, our secondary protagonist is Sari, who is a squad leader in the MEA, which is essentially the department that hunts down stray and criminal wizards and witches who may be conducting violent crimes. Yippee! The two parallels between these two main characters can be looked at similar between Noctis and Stella. We have the opposite red and blue color schemes. We do see them fight and cross each other. As the game splits between two different characters for the first few chapters, we swap between both of their playstyles, get to see their friends and teammates, but of course the plot forces them together after a few hours, and then you get your full party of 6. Now, the only other character that I can in fact see taking inspiration directly from verses 13 or 15 is... I'm not even going to pronounce his name. I'm not even going to try. But he is my favorite! And he is essentially what if Jack Frost, but with guns. He is our lovely cinnamon roll character. He is a bit like Prompto in playstyle, but with ice magic. In this society, there are two kinds of magic users. The legacies, which were born naturally with their powers that are handed down by genetics, and those who are simply called strays, or replicas. At which point, these ordinary people had a brush with death, got a glimpse of the other side in this sea of magic, and are subtly given a choice that if they return to life, they will have some magical powers. Society does not take kindly to these people at all, and much of the plot is about hiding who they are because it is in fact quite dangerous. So much so that not only will you be hunted down and arrested, but there are also essentially drug addicts that want your blood to make drugs. But also these violent street vigilantes who will go around beating up people on the sheer fact of, hey, that might be a magic user. Let's fuck them up. These are the enemies that you will encounter on the overworld, other than monsters. our factions in this universe as follow. We have the MEA, which functions as a police squad to hunt down the stray witches and wizards. We have Owl, who is composed from a only select few stray wizards, headed by Nichiru, who is interesting. Marin, of course, gets involved in Owl. Also, why is it called Owl? I don't know why it's called Owl. I don't think we are given why it's called Owl. To which our third and important lore faction is simply the Guild, which does focus our primary antagonist of the game, as while they do claim to want equal rights for everyone, they are also the main drug manufacturers and are creating more problems than ever. As the story progresses, these are the people that you will uncover a conspiracy from as you take them down, one member at a time. But of course, that's not the real enemy, and I'm not going to get into what actually happens because it is severe story spoilers. There are two different game models, the liberated form and the hooded form. If you are a witch and wizard and wish to hide your magical powers, then you apparently need to have a hood or hat. Otherwise, you will give off your obvious magical aura and shit will go down. This, I assume, is one of the many metaphors about, having to hide your true self from society. And this theme continues throughout much of the game. Though much of the plot, about 75%, I'd say, is a drug-related subplot. As there is a street drug called Rebranding, which gives ordinary people a sense of magical power when they take it. However, taking too much will make you as a damned, and you will slowly not only go violently insane, but also turn into a monster. At which point, the MAA does in fact try to help people. They say, hey, we can get you into a treatment facility. You can be saved. Which is good, but our damned naturally do not trust them, and it goes south. Keeping things as spoiler-free as possible, the main aspect here that ties back to 15 is the connection between our lovely Discount Noctis and our subject of death, our god of the world, Dominus. Given that Versus 13 was meant to portray themes of death, this is the main theme that we see. Much like the cut concept of the eyes that see expiring souls, this is the main parallel that can be pulled from Versus 13. I will say a less concrete parallel that can be drawn between the literal witch hunting in Renatis is not necessarily ties from 15 or Versus, but rather to 13. As we see time and time again, our gang of protagonists, Brandon Lassie, given magic very suddenly, and have to hide their identities as Lassie, not only because they are seen as monsters and will be literally hunted down, but people fear them. Perhaps a stretch, but perhaps not. Though it does make me wonder that in Versus 13 lore was to remain in 15 if those who could see the light of expiring souls might have been ostracized from society. In the Versus trailers, and continued in 15, we do see Noctis's eyes do change color in certain scenes where he uses his magic. Nomura, of course, did state that there was going to be intentions on this and that it would continue throughout the plots, but did not really occur all that much in the final version of 15. However, given the liberated forms of our cast and the glow around their eyes, as well as the magical aura that they possess, I do believe it is fair to draw from one towards the other. While Noctis and the gang of Crownsguard and Glaives did receive their magic from crystals, our wizards typically draw from their near-death experience. While Dominus is more seen as the Grim Reaper rather than our goddess of death Etro in Versus, it is very clear the parallel is real, and it would have been nice to see more themes of death as they were intended to be in 15. Given that the late stage of the Damned does turn into monsters, it can also be referred to as the mirror image of characters like Ravus slowly turning into demons, and the origin of demonology in 15. Remember back when I was talking about that dream world, how I couldn't find the gosh darn receipt? Yeah, well, something similar also kind of happens here, as there is a world simply called Another. In this world, everything is a forest, and the short, condensed version of the lore is that wizards and witches of olden times used this place as refuge, as place to rest and to protect themselves. While much of the world does look the same no matter which portal you enter through it, I do believe it is fair to assess the connection between the inspiration of Another and the semi-scrapped Dream Realm from 15. Also should note, we do see the entire plot of Renatis play out at nighttime, typically given a 2 a.m. timestamp, which is a bit odd because when do these characters sleep? I suppose our MEA agents could just be on the night shift, but the rest of our people are just, 18, 19-year-old kids. Why are you still up at 2 in the morning? Go to bed! The game does have an ending. The final boss is defeated. However, for plot reasons, everyone but Warren loses his magic after having a conversation with Dominus, and the parallels are quite obvious, as given that Noctis was also had ties to the god. However, that's not necessarily the end of it, because the company was gracious enough to release monthly free updated story content, one of which taking place after the final chapter of the game, at which point we see Marin alone. This poor man has supposedly been abandoned by his friends. Japan is unfortunately attacked by an evil entity known as the Consul, who is trying to do a hostile takeover, and it does not go well for him. At the end of this chapter, we are fucked. We are so fucked. As we see, not only was Marin lying to himself and coping that everyone left him, no, they were all dead. At which point, then we see Marin having to fight Dominus, become Dominus, and given this massive cliffhanger sequel bait of an ending. But there's more updates, right? It'll be fine, right? Yeah, no. The other updates are a mix between scenes between chapters, but then also a bit of a dream sequence for our party members, as each one gets a chapter where they can decide what if things went differently, at which point it also, of course, goes terribly wrong. They then have Marin break them out of the spell and return to reality and decide that yes, it was all a dream. What the fuck is the point of this? Our final chapter half-ass ties everything together. That yeah, something weird is going on here. We think the guild is responsible, Consul, yada yada yada. At which point the game makes you go through a back-to-back boss tournament of every single final guild boss. No items, no saving in between, get wrecked. Then you are taken back to the actual normal ending of the main. No changes whatsoever, just a new ending screen. What was the point of this? I don't know. Sequel bait? Cliffhangers? Retcons? I don't know what's going on here. And this is the point when I had to ask myself, is Versus 13 just cursed? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad game by any means, but it's still very rough around the edges. But hey, we still got Lost Soul Aside to check out, right? So everything will be fine, right? What do you mean it's been delayed? Oh my god, I don't like the pattern recognition. So, here we are, a few months later, Lost Soul Aside did come out, even after the 2-month delay. Unfortunately, the launch was rough, as they had to release several patches to fix the glitches in the frame rates. While it took me a while to finish the game despite it being fairly short, LSA does what it was meant to do. The combat is great, the environments are pretty, but it feels very repetitive. Not so much rushed to say that they obviously had to cut down a bunch of content, but word has it that Sony did in fact step in and demand rewrites. Why? We don't know. What got cut? What got rewritten? We don't know. There's literally nothing to say about this. We also have some behind-the-scenes drama that I barely understand myself. That being said, LSA is not so much a Versus 13 callback as it is taking more visual inspirations. We have our Noctis clone, of course, but we also have, the Imperials, who do seem to slightly resemble the MTs to an extent. The Emperor himself, however, is just whatever this is. We also have an Imperial officer who seems to be a mix between Ravis and Loki. Take that if you will, try not to get into weird fanfiction territory, please. I also like the comment about how Lord Arena is often referred to as a flying fish, which, to be fair, in his little form here that you see him most of the time, he does kind of look like Leviathan. I don't think it was intentional, but I do find it amusing. Other similar visuals can be tracked throughout the game, but that's about it. We have to keep in mind the development team. Now, for so long, this was a passion project by just one man, and he did in fact get his team. But they did in fact have to rebuild what he started, and then the rewrites. This poor man very clearly has aged poorly, thanks to the stress he's under through his 10-year game development. I also did appreciate that there was not really a romance plot in LSA. The entire goal is to rescue your sister. The lore is interesting, but it feels a little bit lacking at times. But I'd still say that it is a good game. Even though it's surface level inspired by Will you stop that? You're lucky you're cute. It is still nice to see that he was able to finish it. Perhaps not to the expectations that he started with, but it is still a good, fun time. No, it is not some miracle of an Expedition 33 of a project, but it is still nice. That being said, the Versus 13 hole in my heart still remains empty. And the only thing that we can do right now is wait for Kingdom Hearts 4 and see what happens. I would like to end this video with a joke I made a long time ago. That somewhere in our multiverse theory, the timeline that Versus 13 came out as intended is also probably the same timeline that Firefly got its proper runtime. Two different fandoms, two different medias, both did not reach the conclusions that the creators wanted them to be. I've also said that, hey, maybe the real Versus 13 is the friends we made along the way. I would like to give some shoutouts as well to Zazzle, those in the Noctis Discord server, as well as the following YouTubers: please go check out their content on this subject. And until then, sweet dreams, my dear prince.